Hello everyone, Scott McPhee is my name and my talk is on the use of camera traps in ornithology. So what is a camera trap? It's basically a camera that can be independently triggered to take a photo based on external stimuli, and this is usually done by a motion sensor. Camera traps have been around since the late 1800s. The early ones used tripwires to activate them, and then as camera technology improved, so did the camera traps as well, and pretty much they're all digital from about 2002-2003 onwards. When and where are they used in ornithology? Well, because the cameras are fixed in set locations, they're primarily used on terrestrial birds. They can be used on non-terrestrial birds, but only at locations that you know they're going to frequent, like waterholes and nesting sites. They're very useful for when access to a site is hard. The site may be a long way away, or even the topography in the site might be a bit of an issue. And they're also very useful for recording secretive or rare terrestrial birds, things that you know are there, but you're not likely to be able to spot in an actual physical visit. So what kind of data do they generate? Well, there's a mixture of quantitative and qualitative data. The most simplest thing that you're going to get quantitatively is the occupancy or the presence of a species at a site. And from this, population numbers can be estimated by combining the number of camera captures with the probability of the bird being captured. You can also work out temporal and spatial movements of the birds if your study is running for long enough, so you can look at the seasonality and where they move and where they're likely to be found at different times of year and times of day. And then qualitatively, you can also observe behaviours, things like social organisation, deal behaviour, agonistic behaviour, preening, mating, foraging, and so forth. So how do we go about this? Well, the most important thing is to work out what you want to find out, because that will affect the way you place and use the camera traps. So in my presentation, I looked at 4 different studies where they used camera traps, and each had a different work method based on their goals and an environment they were in. The first one here was in 2017, where brides and 3 other people were looking at molting Canada geese and British greylag geese, and they wanted to see if camera traps could identify more colour marked individuals than actual teams of volunteers in a 100-day period. So to do this, they placed 2 cameras at the water's edge and 2 out in the field where the birds were molting. Between August 2012 and June 2013, Snydersick placed 15 cameras on Tasman Island to look at behaviour from the Lewin's rail, and also to document whether or not what the advantages of deploying cameras for extended periods were. So to do this, she placed cameras in areas where she knew the birds were going to frequent, but also within that pool of sites, she picked the ones that were most conducive for photos being taken as well. And then in February 2017 to June 2018, Ronsel and this other group of people were surveying the terrestrial avian assemblage at selected sites in an area of lowland Peruvian Amazonia, which covered 150,000 hectares. So their goal was to get an overview, a baseline understanding of the terrestrial avian biodiversity in a region that was under threat from logging and gold mining. And to do this, they set the cameras on a regular grid with 1.5 kilometres between them, and then moved them around this whole area. And finally, between 1998 and 2001, O'Brien and Kinnaird deployed 38 film cameras in the Way Kangguk region of Indonesia to look at the presence of the great Argus pheasant, and they were interested in how things like human population density and altitude and other factors like that affected the populations of the birds. So what they did is the cameras were moved between 215 locations throughout the study area, and at each location they also recorded things like human population density and altitude and so on. So you should be able to see here that if you want a valid survey of the terrestrial avian assemblage in a given area, then you've got to look at the photos as being population samples. So the cameras have to be distributed in such a way as to give you a statistically valid representative sample of the whole population. And this is exactly what was done in the Peruvian example. But if you're just interested in specific information about a given species, you can be more selective in your camera placement, but there's still things that you have to consider. Things like access to the cameras for downloading the images and changing batteries, the likelihood of other animals or vegetation setting off the camera, the likelihood of vegetation growing over the camera in the course of a long study, and also how much space is in front of the camera. In the goose study, they found that anything more than 5 meters away was too far to read the details on the color tags. So what kind of results can you get? So let's look at the quantitative results first. First thing you have to do is sort the photos. in the goose study, after 100 days, they had 38,330 images, and out of that they discarded 6,720 because it was night and too dark, 4,321 because they were false triggers set off by livestock and humans and so on. 27,289 of the photos were discarded because the birds were too far away, unringed, or multiples of the same individual at the same sighting. And this is something that every study has to define, and that's what is a sighting. So if you have one bird wander in front of a camera and stay there and you get two consecutive photos about 3 seconds apart, that's still only one sighting. It's not two sightings. So usually there's a time interval between the photos that gets defined to help you work out what a sighting is, and that time interval is usually anywhere between 5 minutes to an hour. So in the goose study, after they'd removed all of the other photos that weren't of any use, they were left with 1,101 images that contained 1,176 separate sightings of 159 colour marked individuals. Now this took 21 hours of work manually sorting the images. So to manually sort them is a huge commitment. Some projects now outsource that as a citizen science project to get people to sort them, or it can just be done in your team, and this group did it just themselves. It took 21 hours. Now, over the same 100 days survey period, the volunteers were only able to identify 216 sightings of the ringed geese. So, and out of that 216, only 5 were of birds not found in the photographs. So the camera traps were clearly way more effective in finding colour marked individual geese than people were. You've got 1,176 sightings to 216. Other data that was carried out by some of the studies I looked at, here's a rarefaction curve from the Peruvian study that it shows on the x-axis the cumulative number of captures, and on the y-axis the cumulative number of species. So you can see as the captures go up, the amount of species recorded go up, but it flattens out. So you're starting to get close to the upper limit of how many species are actually in your survey area. You can also discern things like the DUL activity. Here we have it here for the Lewin's rail. So this is the general activity of the species or of the bird over 24 hours. So if you have a look on the y-axis, it's camera trap events, and then the time of day in 24 hours on the x-axis. You can see that the bird is quite active from about around about 4 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. Then it quietens down from a little bit during the day, and then from about 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. it picks up and then quietens down again around about 6 p.m. onwards. And also in the bottom left hand corner there, this is a graph of the spatial distribution of the great Argus pheasant, looking on the x-axis of the probability of the bird being photographed, and on the y-axis the elevation. So as you can see, on the x-axis the elevation, the y-axis the probability of the bird being photographed. And so you can see there, the higher you get, the less chance there is of photographing one of the birds, and by about 1,300 metres high, you've only got about 1/3 the chance of photographing it that you have at sea level. So by analysing the images, you can also work out some qualitative data as well, looking at social organisation, courtship displays, hunting, foraging, roosting. This is all to do with how you interpret what you're seeing in the image, but the ability to do this is greatly enhanced by capturing video footage, not just still images. You can also capture unintended but useful things like predation. Here we have a female golden shoulder parrot being taken by a nest from a feral cat. So that can also inform your study work as well. Okay, so just quickly, as we're running out of time, the strengths and weaknesses. Strengths are high amount of samples can be taken, particularly in very inaccessible areas, and particularly of hard to find rare birds and secretive birds. There's a lot of new advances that are very exciting, particularly with machine learning algorithms that are able to identify species in the photos. They can process up to 2,000 photos a minute at a 98% accuracy rate, so the tests there are very promising. There's also Wi-Fi enabled cameras to download the images remotely, and motion tracking cameras in development as well. The weaknesses are not good for non-terrestrial birds, expensive to start with, prone to false triggers, and you still have to get in the field to interpret your results. So my conclusion is, under certain circumstances, camera traps are an extremely valuable tool in bird survey work. The right circumstances are terrestrial species of interest and enough resources to set them up and analyse the images. So if you have any questions, please put them on the forum. Thank you.